There are many versions leading to actually our discussion over why the president of South Africa decided to secretly sneak into Zimbabwe and have a meeting with Zwikanandas as well as Emerson Tambuzo Mnangagwa. In simple terms, we can, if we are not sugarcoating this, we can safely say and have meeting with the other faction of ZANU-PF, specifically the faction that is pushing for constitutional mutilation in Zimbabwe. Well, we've heard numerous views, and here I will be actually reading you another view from this time around the News Hawks. It has a different interpretation, but somehow some facts, links. Greetings and welcome to your lovely channel, the Hlonipani Global News. If you're watching us for the very first time, please do remember to press the red or black subscribe button so that next time when we beam live, you become the very first one to watch us. So I'll read you the version of the News Hawks as well as also the version of Rutendo Matara. Let's start with the News Hawks one. I'll just squash it in one live broadcast. It says South African President Cyril Ramaphosa yesterday visited Zimbabwe President Emerson Mnangagwa at his Prikepo farm in Kweke on a private visit, which Pretoria later described as a working visit, amid an attempt to keep details of the mission under wraps. Informed diplomatic and security sources told the newshawks last night that Ramaphosa had come to see Mnangagwa over three key issues: Zimbabwe's political and security situation, given growing tensions over constitutional amendments around the 2030 agenda, and subtle threats of a coup, South Africa's upcoming November local government elections, and funding issues and business interest, a South African intelligence official told the newshawk. It was a private visit. That is why the South African government initially had not announced it until after the fact. Ramaphosa arrived in Harare around 10 a.m. And was received by Mnangagwa at the Robert Gabriel Mugabe International Airport to go to the farm. It was only last evening that Pretoria officials issued a statement after the visit to explain the situation, saying it was a working visit. Ramaphosa had come to see Mnangagwa to understand what was happening on the ground regarding the 2030 agenda. South Africa is worried Zimbabwe could be on a path towards a renewed destabilization. Mnangagwa explained the situation to Ramaphosa, and the South African president said as long as Zimbabwe follows its own constitution and laws, there is no problem. Ramaphosa said South Africa and SADC will not tolerate another coup in Zimbabwe. That is very clear and well understood by all involved, including Vice President Constantino Chiwenga, who is locked in a succession battle with Mnangagwa. So the visit had a political and security focus. Then the issues of South African local government elections, which Ramaphosa announced on April 30. The ANC had been in contact with ZANU-PF for months to exchange ideas, resources, and logistics over a number of issues, including elections. On April 1, 2026, ANC Treasurer General Gwen Ramokoba visited ZANU-PF in Harare to strengthen ties, the ties between the two liberation movements. She was hosted by the ZANU-PF counterpart, Treasurer General Patrick Chinamasa. Their meeting focused on the influence of global forces funding opposition parties in Africa to unseat liberation movements from power. They also discussed sharing strategies for sustainable funding for liberation movements. That visit followed a prior courtesy call Ramaphosa had made to Mnangagwa at State House in November 2025. During that trip, she discussed encouraging progressive businesses to participate in party initiative and hailed historical fraternal relations between the ANC and ZANU-PF. That is the context of Ramaphosa's visit to Mnangagwa yesterday, and that is why those business people linked to Mnangagwa were there at the farm. What you guys call Zugananda, they are regarded as progressive businessmen in both ZANU-PF and ANC circles. Liberation movements in the region have an agreement not just to share strategies to remain in power, but also resources. That was part of Ramaphosa's mission, preceded by those visits by Ramaphosa. Those were party issues, and that's why the trip was initially classified as private visit on both sides of the Limpopo until Pretoria tried to brand it a working visit. As an afterthought, a statement by Ramaphosa's office said His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa earlier today undertook a working visit to the Republic of Zimbabwe for an engagement with his Zimbabwean counterpart, His Excellency President Emmerson Mnangagwa, to discuss issues of mutual and bilateral interest. South Africa and Zimbabwe maintain a historical, political, and dynamic trade relationship. In 2025, South African exports to Zimbabwe totaled about 4.3 billion, with agricultural products and machinery dominating the majority of trade goods. The truth is, it was a private trip to discuss political, security, business, and financial issues. Now, let's go to Rutendo Matara, and then I will wrap it up with my analysis, because it's important to take into consideration of all these views that are playing out in the public domain, and not actually to yesterday I was moving with the narrative of Wopwell Chinono, but okay, so Rutendo posted yesterday, before many details started coming out, saying Ramaphosa's visit, a clear message against the unconstitutional attempt to extend Mnangagwa's term in office. Different actually versions. He says, in politics, actions are words, and those actions are meant to speak louder than actual words. By Ramaphosa coming to Zimbabwe to visit President Mnangagwa on a Sunday, after a week in which South Africans were protesting vehemently against foreigners, in a country where Zimbabweans constitute 40% of migrants and where the Ramaphosa government did not stop the protest, a week in which the former head of the army and vice president gave an allegory about how King Hezekiah spent the rest of his years in prison, asking God to prolong his life, and immediately there were calls for his dismissal. It is clear that the visit illustrates an urgent attempt by President Ramaphosa to mediate a dangerous rift between the vice president and the president that could fracture Zimbabwe and destabilize the whole region. Ramaphosa is here to say to our president, you need to fix your house by uniting and stop making reckless decisions that could destabilize the country and region by displacing more of your people into a volatile South Africa. It is clear that Zimbabwe is on the brink of another coup because of the reckless attempts by the president and his advisors to force change the constitution in order for the current president to hold the ascendancy of Vice President Chiwenga. But that is not being taken lying down by thousands of men and women who fought behind Chiwenga in Mozambique, Congo, and Angola, and did peacemaking in Sudan, Somalia, and Chad, despite attempts to manipulate the leadership of the army. How do we know this is the case? We know it from history because just before the coup against Mugabe in 2017, Thabo Mbeki came to meet and warn Mugabe's G40 that the military was not happy with their moves, and they did not take heed. As a result of this failure, Thabo Mbeki has lost the respect that Zimbabweans used to have for him as a mediator. This is why Ramaphosa himself, as the president of the most powerful economy in Africa, had to come to try and speak sense into his counterpart, who is on the brink of causing the biggest instability in this region since apartheid. Some say Ramaphosa is here to ask for money for the ANC's election campaign, but the timing is not conducive for that, especially after the Ghanaian government has issued loudly opposing the protest against foreigners in South Africa. This visit is more a sign of a crisis than a friendly meeting between the two leaders, despite the South African government allowing protests against African foreigners, sending a loud message to leaders who mismanage their countries and displace refugees. Ramaphosa was compelled to come to Zimbabwe, the very country this message is mainly directed to avert an existential crisis that could spill even more Zimbabwean refugees into South Africa. Another fact that proves this theory is, had Ramaphosa come to ask for money on behalf of the ANC, other ANC leaders like the SG Fikile Mbalula would have come along, but he came alone. Additionally, South African government officials wouldn't have leaked the information of the trip if it was not a sign of a crisis. Zimbabwe is at the brink, and we hope leadership will prevail over self-interest. Exactly. You know, I tend to buy what Rutendo Matara is saying more than what Newshawks is saying. Remember, what Newshawks is saying is a source from the South African intelligence, and you cannot trust that source. You know, the role of the intelligence is to push or to advance the interests of the government of South Africa. And the government of South Africa didn't want the message to spill out that Ramaphosa was coming there to actually try to mediate between Emerson Mnangagwa as well as also retired General Chiwenga. But it's clear that Mnangagwa made things worse, in my view, if that's the case, because he hijacked the program of South Africa. They always do so. I remember at one point there was a trip of the ANC comrade led by then Ace Mahashe, the Secretary General of the African National Congress, and that trip led to the firing of Ace Mahashe within the African National Congress, because ZANU-PF manipulated that trip, and the person they met was Opetimbof, and ZANU-PF manipulated that trip. They had to twist what Opetimbof, what actually the then secretary of the ANC said. They said the secretary of the ANC said they wanted to get rid of Ramaphosa. That is why you saw Ramaphosa acting on his Secretary General, that is Ace Mahashe, whose case up to today I think hasn't been concluded. Well, that's an issue for another day. I don't want to dwell so much into issues of South Africa, because not that I'm afraid of, we will deal with them at the right time, but at the moment we have got a pressing issue in Zimbabwe that needs a solution. So I buy into the idea of Rutendo Matara, even though I never thought in some few months I would have ever done that. You know, because the meeting was supposed to be a private meeting. The meeting was manipulated by ZANU-PF. They made it public. And specifically the Mnangagwa faction, they wanted to spin it to their advantage. Now they wanted to give an impression that Ramaphosa came there to support Mnangagwa's unconstitutional constitutional amendment bill number 3 of 2026. But I strongly believe Ramaphosa was coming, realizing that there is an imminent coup. It's the repetition of what happened in 2017, but the faces are different. Then it was Thabo Mbeki who told Mugabe the military was not happy. And now it was Cyril Ramaphosa, and you could see, especially the communications from the retired military general, that is Winston Sikauke Mapranga. He quickly had, in fact, he had to leak that visit. And he had to comment after the visit. I'm sure they are going to be issuing also their views concerning the visit of Cyril Ramaphosa. But I strongly believe Ramaphosa was coming to Zimbabwe in an effort to mediate the situation, because it's written all over the world that Zimbabwe is on the brink of another possible coup. And this time around, it may be bloody, it may displace a lot of Zimbabweans, and it may cause a lot of problems, especially to the neighbors, because people may seek refugee in neighboring countries. You can see the stubborn nature of Ziganandas. They want to stay in power because they know what the presidency of retired General Chiwenga comes for them, will bring actually to them. They haven't been nice to the man. They have said a lot of nasty things that I strongly believe when he comes through to power, definitely he would not revenge per se, but he would seek to bring about justice. A lost cause within the regime of Emerson Tambutso Mnangagwa, because Mnangagwa was not by the military, and the expectation was to deal with individuals like Wicknell Chivayo, as well as also Kudawashe Takure. I mean, we have heard from the intelligence leaks that they had a problem already with Kudawashe Takure over the way he handled finances of ZANU-PF. And they strongly believe that he took a lot of money which was supposed to go to ZANU-PF. But Mnangagwa has defended the man, most probably because he is also implicated in that regard. You know, you are dealing with a highly deceptive president to ever emerge in Zimbabwe. So that is my view in simple terms. Let me not be long. Thank you very much for watching us. If you are watching us for the very first time, please do remember to press the red or black subscribe button so that next time when we beam live, you become the very first one to watch us. You can financially support this channel by pressing the join button and be part of our members who are the heartbeat of this channel. You can equally do so by pressing the thanks button and send us stars. Okanzubu Mhlabane is signing out. Let me love and leave you. Let's meet on the other side of the live broadcast as I give you